Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. This week we're going to talk about bottlenecks in your process. I'm going to try and give you 5 bottlenecks that are really killing your business, but we're going to look at different things. And most people sort of realize that they have bottlenecks, but tend not to address them until they become either a major obstacle to the business. So the question is, what do we class as bottlenecks? So according to Harvard, there are 7 of the most important or most common process bottlenecks in volume hiring are decentralizing the hiring process, manual candidate screening, CV-based applications, unclear picture of the role, an HR tech stack not developed enough, the process is too complex, and the interview schedule is not fit for volume recruitment. So they're just sort of simple things on volume recruitment. According to Forbes, though, up to 77% of hiring managers think recruiters are not screening candidates properly, while 51% of recruiters believe hiring managers don't do an adequate job communicating what they're looking for. So it's a really sort of interesting comment. There's a great article which I'll post for you as well, which you can have a look at, which talks about 13 bottlenecks in recruitment. 31% of recruiters count the quality of hiring as the most important success metric, followed by retention. However, having a clear vision of what a qualified candidate actually looks like will help define if you've got a bottleneck in that process. And recruiters went on to claim that when they're looking for candidates, 60% said they find talent was their biggest bottleneck, and 40% said engaging with that talent is that bottleneck, because they don't have an understanding of who to reach out to, where to reach out to, and how to reach out. So again, scattergun approach, but all processed by a bottleneck. 76% of recruiters believe that AI will have an impact on recruitment, and yet only 10% embrace AI, and 50% of candidate applications aren't fit for purpose. So again, is that a big bottleneck in your business, that your application process is producing twice as much that you don't need? So according to my research, most companies don't have a budget for curing bottlenecks. For example, they will wisely spend a budget on a CRM or tracking something, but don't have a budget to actually improve that CRM. It's just that blanket approach. So this week, should I say, the whole team are here this week. Heather is due to join us, but she's stuck in traffic somewhere, so she'll be there with us. Dave is back from hospital, and Dave's son is out of hospital, which is good news. From there, and Paul and I are sort of ready to sort of kick straight into this conversation. So, open question. As a leader of a business, what is your personal number one bottleneck that either slows the recruitment process down or causes attrition?
Okay, well, I'll kick this one off. I think we're going to get to this a bit later on, though, Howard, in detail. I've got, you mentioned 5 bottlenecks. I've got a list of 5, but I'll kick off with my number one. My number one is staff attrition. It's, not having enough people or not keeping your people. It's people leaving, coming and going. I can't think of anything that causes more disruption than a constant turnstile of people coming and going. That is genuinely, in my opinion, one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest bottleneck issue for any recruitment business. Keeping your great people, keeping talent, developing people is unquestionably, it should be the number one priority for any recruitment business. I have 4 others. Do you want me to go through them, or would you prefer to come back to those?
I'd like to weave them in as we go along.
Okay. Well, I'll let Dave have his say in that case.
Yeah.
I think mine is keeping your staff motivated, because a lot of recruitment, as we know, is about process. And given that, I forget the exact percentage, but given that 40% of the people that work in recruitment are new to recruitment in the last few years, because we lost so many and now we're hiring back. People lose motivation with the process that we have to go through. There is so much that we have to do now as recruiters. And for owners of businesses, keeping your people motivated I think is a real bottleneck, because the bottleneck comes when they lose their motivation, because then everything else slips. The process slips, the way that you behave, the way you interact with your staff, the way they interact with each other. It all begins to slip, and suddenly all the things that make a really good recruiter begin to just dissipate a little bit. And then it takes a bit longer to find a candidate. It takes a bit longer to have a conversation with a candidate. It takes a bit longer to help close a candidate or present them. So for me, it's to Paul's point, one, keeping your people absolutely spot on, but two, one, you got them, keeping them motivated to do what they need to do.
It's really interesting, because we obviously don't talk about the answers to the questions. We get a copy of the questions before, and it's really interesting because I put, my thought on the first question is I could go on for hours and hours about the number of bottlenecks, but my view of the first biggest bottleneck that we have is that we recruit the wrong people.
Yeah.
And so the bottleneck is not the fact that we are recruiting the wrong people, because actually what we're doing, we're recruiting the right people based on the process that we have to recruit our people. And therefore the process bottleneck is in the process of our recruitment. So are we going back and changing the way we recruit the people, the type of people we're recruiting? Because if we're not getting people through year one, that's a bottleneck for the business. So it's interesting that all three of us have said the same thing, more or less, is that the biggest bottleneck that we have is the people we recruit, and then how we manage those people to go through the process. So it's an interesting sort of view that people don't see that as a bottleneck, because they just genuinely say, oh, I've recruited the wrong person. I just keep recruiting the wrong person. No, you're recruiting the right person based on the process that you have. To change the process, so it changes the type of person that you actually recruit, would be my answer to that. So let's sort of push back into sort of then technology and back into sort of the technical side of things then. So we hear a high percentage of leaders that their CRM isn't fit for purpose, and it's their main process bottleneck. So the question is, how would you cure that?
Well, I mean, look, I've been working in this kind of situation as a management consultant, as that's the expression, for I don't know how many years now. Let me just guess, 14 years. I've never yet met a recruitment business owner that thinks their CRM is any cop. They all think it doesn't matter which one they buy, it's always rubbish, doesn't work, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. And it's that, it's that little Britain thing, isn't it? The computer says no. Basically, the issue isn't necessarily, and in most cases, the actual software at all. It's the actual operators. It wouldn't matter if you had the Rolls Royce of CRMs. If people aren't using it properly, it really doesn't matter. You've got to answer your question, make sure that your people are, I suppose, I'm sort of cautious to use the word, but drilled into using the CRM correctly. Very often, I think people fail to understand that the data that they possess, in other words, candidate data, is incredibly valuable. I mean valuable from the perspective of pounds, shillings, and pence. They have very often a huge number, and tens of thousands, hundreds, sometimes 100,000 plus candidates sitting on a database who are, not necessarily coded correctly, aren't looked after, aren't spoken to regularly, are disengaged with the business. And what happens, of course, is that we continue to go out spending money on job boards or on clicks and so forth to attract candidates who are actually already on our database. We've already spent money attracting those candidates, and now we're going to do it again and again and again. It doesn't make any sense at all. And the truth is that the CRM is generally perfectly adequate. Doesn't matter which one you have, they're generally pretty adequate. Or in fact, if you've got an advanced CRM, we find that people aren't using the advanced function. So the answer to the question, to your question, Howard, in my view, is to make sure that our people understand how to use the system correctly. They're properly trained. It isn't something that you do some months after they've joined. It's one of the very first things you do when they join, when they're onboarded, is to make sure they understand totally how to use a CRM, not just sitting in on a few webinars with the manufacturer, but to sit down with one or two champions in the business, people who really know their way around it. Because I'll tell you now, if I was getting into recruitment today as a young consultant, one of the first things I'd want to do is master the CRM. I'd really want to be a wizard on it, not just a wizard on the CRM, but a wizard on every element of social media, because that's the way in which you're going to find your candidates. That's the way in which you're going to make sure you fill more vacancies or assignments. So to me, it's not the CRM itself, it's the actual usage of the CRM. And it's the processes and the methods and the training of our people to make sure we get the best out of what we've got. And if we don't do that, and I see it all the time, we end up wasting more and more and more money trying to find the very same candidates we already registered last year, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. We've already got the data. We just don't keep in touch with the candidates, and we waste our money in that sense. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? This has been a topic of discussion from the days when we had Rolodexes. And when the Rolodexes got stuck, they didn't work. It's the same thing, isn't it? And I think the answer to this is aligned to Howard's point about hiring the right people in the first place.
Yeah.
Very few of the people that I know in recruitment, when they do an interview for a new recruitment consultant, either new to the industry or new to that business, bother to interview them on how they use the system.
Yeah.
How they do a Boolean search, how they use LinkedIn, how they can scrape details from whatever number of systems they use. They tend to interview them rightly on what their purpose is and their attitude and how they sell and how they engage. And yet, most of the time as they're starting, they're using a system. So I would say, to align this to Howard's answer to the first question, make sure that when you're interviewing people, you know that you're hiring people who know their way around the system. You know, if you use Voyager or Bullhorn, but now you're on Access or Vincere or whatever, it doesn't matter. They would still be able to navigate around the system. One of the customers that I spend time with, they spend an hour and a half as part of the interview process on saying to the prospective recruiter, right, here's a search. This is what I'm looking for. I'm going to leave you alone now for half an hour. I want you to tell me what your thought process is, how you found them, what your thought processes were, what you're going to do, how you're going to perform. And even if they haven't used the system before, they'll just give them the basic instructions and away they go. And then they leave them in the room. They come back half an hour later and they have rejected so many people because they haven't been able to use the system in a way that they would think is effective. Yeah. It's a bugbear, isn't it, for us all with systems?
Yeah.
So I think from my point of view, I think we're right, is that I don't think we truly know or change our processes in our CRM at all. And I think that's mainly because most recruitment agencies don't have a deep enough relationship with their CRM provider, as we were saying, and to me, there's, the amount of chatter that we hear from the sales floor, we don't like the system, it's too hard, it's not fit for purpose. If we're not listening to that chatter and then doing something about it, then obviously that will start to cause attrition because people will leave because people believe that's another system's better. So we should be reviewing our system sort of, I would think, constantly, either on a quarterly basis, but we should actually be reviewing either changing our system like we do with cars. You change your car every 2 or 3 years. If you've got a hire car, et cetera, you change them every 2 or 3 years because cars change and they upgrade. So is your system still fit for purpose? So if you're going to invest in something, you want to invest in something that's not just a poor storage system. So I'd say quarterly, we should be looking to upgrade our CRM that sits in line with the processes of the business. So if you're listening to what the chatter is on the sales floor, then you can start to look at areas that you can go to your provider and start to look to change things or alter things so it adds functionality that makes our consultant's life easier to use. And that's the sort of thing that lots of people don't believe, that you can change the CRM, when actually there's lots of functionality in most CRMs that you can change and that you can create. And that's the thing where I think you've got to start to look at, is that if you've got a bottleneck in your CRM, people don't like using that part of it, go back to your supplier and work a way that you can get around that bottleneck or make it. And the idea for the CRM is to make the job faster, quicker, and easier. And that means developing it. So we spend an awful lot of money on implementing it, but then we spend very little money then on developing it because we just expect it just to be used where we should be spending that money on developing it. So, Paul, you said you had 5 things. So we've named sort of your number one bottleneck. Which bottleneck do you believe then causes the most damage to a business?
All right. Well, I'm going to give you 2 here because I can't separate them, and you'll understand why. The first is not qualifying candidates correctly. So you've really not interviewed them properly, limited knowledge of them, haven't understood their drivers to change jobs, really haven't understood their experience and background, don't understand the cultural fit, if you like, of your candidate to a prospective client, and I could go on and on. And I think that is still, it's one of the problems, and I'm going to sound like a very old man here, but well, I am an old man, but anyway.
Beat me to it.
I don't have to sound like one. I am an old man. Let's just make that statement. I think the truth is that in the old days, in inverted commas, we interviewed candidates face to face. They came in to the office. We saw them. We sat with them. We acknowledged their presence. We spent sometimes an hour or longer, or even half a day sometimes, with people that we considered to be, inverted commas, hot candidates. We got to know them. One of the problems, I'm afraid, with modern recruitment is that we don't physically meet candidates very often any longer, which is one of the reasons why I'm so keen that we use video conferencing facilities, because that at least gives you the opportunity to see people, to connect with them, see them face to face. Although we're now back in the office very often, and so are our candidates. So I'm always saying to my clients, please meet candidates, go and see them, find a coffee shop to meet them, invite them in, meet them before their interviews, meet them after their interviews, and so on and so on. I think this is a major cause of issues, bottlenecks. I think the second thing, which is absolutely aligned, is the same issue, but in reverse, i.e. with clients. We're not tight enough to clients. We don't know clients as well as we should. We haven't met them at all, or we don't meet them regularly. We're not tight enough to them to know what's going on in their businesses, their anxieties, their concerns, their worries, their challenges. I could go on, it's a long list. That if you're lacking information in both of those core areas, I mean, this is basic, of course, then of course that's going to be your major damaging element to your business. Not knowing your clients and candidates as well as you should as a professional recruiter is the root cause of a lack of productivity and therefore revenue income. So, I can't think of any. I mean, I said earlier, clearly we came back to that point about keeping people, attrition rates, absolutely. Having great people in your business means you've got a great business, in my opinion. But clearly we need to know our stuff. Our stuff is knowing our clients and candidates inside and out. If you don't know that, you're not going to be effective.
I think, and I would add, it's almost similar to yours, Paul. I think for me, it starts at the very beginning in the root cause, which is taking the time to understand why the requirement exists in the first place.
Yeah.
For example, if you don't find this person, what happens to that project, to that company, to the client, to his or her career? Now that may be that may work really well for individual requirements. If you need 10 engineers, then it's slightly different. But often recruiters are so excited to get the requirement, they forget to ask why the requirement exists in the first place, what are the implications of them not finding it, and really having an intelligent business discussion where you can. Paul, you're so right, because so often we get requirements, or recruiters get requirements from portals, and the requirement is just a number.
Yeah.
So you don't have much of an opportunity to have that engagement. But I think the really good recruiters are the ones that say, actually, I do need to understand a bit more about this before I work on it. And the more you understand about how important it is, the more important it is that if they don't come back to you in the right time with an interview request or follow up from a CV submission, you can say, remember, you did tell me that if you don't get these 3 people, this is what's going to happen to the project, or this is what's going to happen to your hospital, or this is what's going to happen in the classroom, whatever the requirement, whatever sector it's for. And you just sound more intelligent. And of course, you get to understand how vital it is, the role that you do.
Just a quick anecdote, Howard, just a very quick thing that's related to this. I was talking the other day to a client who was pretty upset about the fact that he'd made a placement, a very senior individual, and this individual then accepted a counteroffer. I can almost hear everyone groaning as I mention that phrase. The counteroffer was something in the order of £50,000 more than the candidate was already on. And the reason that the candidate accepted was because he felt that deserting the client meant that the project that he was heading up was going to go south and cause his employer a great deal of issues. And I said to the consultant, what could you have done about this? And he said, what bothers me is that when I was a young consultant, I was told, to Dave's point, when I interview people, especially senior people, to ask them, when you resign and you leave, or you resign, what kind of damage is your resignation, what trauma will your resignation cause your current employer? He said, if I'd have asked that question, I would have known that they would have been absolutely traumatized by his resignation and would have done anything to keep him, because losing that project would have caused them enormous issues. And I would have had backup candidates. And I thought, well, that's to your point, Dave. It's asking the right questions at the right time, getting deeper and closer to your candidates to ensure you're in control of the situation. So, just an interesting anecdote. At least I thought it was interesting.
Thanks for that, Paul.
Hi, Heather.
So I think on that, I think when we start to look at what causes the business, most damage, besides recruiting the wrong people, I think what we're talking about there is that candidate acquisition, and then what we do with that candidate once we've acquired the candidate is the biggest bottleneck. The money we waste on advertising, that we waste on searching LinkedIn, the job boards, etc. And the time we spend doing that is a time that is massively costly. And I always say that the backdraft from not knowing how to reach out to your audience and then keeping them engaged is really sort of what causes a problem as a bottleneck. And if we start to think about most recruitment agencies, certainly on the perm side and certainly on the temp side as well, still put one candidate forward to one job. Where if we put one candidate forward to 5 jobs every single time, we're increasing our opportunity to actually place that candidate. But the bottleneck that occurs when we put a candidate forward to one job is, as Paul's just done with his anecdote, the candidate might accept a counteroffer, they may accept an offer from another company, but we haven't spread bet our candidate across the marketplace. And I think that's the bottleneck that causes a huge amount of issues, that we are not using our candidate acquisition to its maximum, and therefore not getting a true return of investment from our candidate because we're not pushing out. So to me, if I was start to look at the first bottleneck I'd look at in my process is, am I putting candidates to multiple opportunities? And if I'm putting candidates to multiple opportunities, therefore, how do I control of those opportunities? So here's a question. Once we've highlighted a bottleneck, how do you address it?
Let's let Heather go first, because Heather's just joined. Gotcha.
No, you can't do that to me, Paul. I'm just catching up with the conversation. Off you go.
Okay, I'll kick it off then. So, sorry, Howard, once you've highlighted a bottleneck, how would you address it?
How would you address it?
Yeah, I mean, we've recently, with one of my clients, we've been talking about handling confrontation, and that word alone sort of sends shivers down the backbone of most people. Most people want to avoid confrontation, and that's perfectly understandable. Who in their right mind wants to deal with confrontation? But what we know about dealing with difficult situations is the longer you leave them, the worse they become. They very rarely heal themselves. They tend to get worse and worse until they reach a stage where you simply can't deal with them any longer. They become beyond care and attention, and something awful tends to happen. So the answer, I think, is to kick and get straight into these thorny issues as quickly as you can. Don't kick them into the long grass. They're not going to get better. They're going to get worse. And by the time they get worse, you'll probably find it extremely difficult to mend the problem. So I think the answer is to address these bottlenecks, not only at the point at which you're aware of them, but I think one of the things I haven't said yet, but I'll bring it up now. One of the problems, big bottlenecks for business owners, is lack of time to think. If you're able to spend time stepping back from your business every day or every week to analyze what's going on, to look at the data, to look at what's going on, the trends in your vertical sectors, to talk to clients, to be aware of candidates' moods and attitudes and sentiments, to be aware of the way your staff are feeling and their challenges, then with a bit of luck, not even luck, but with some proper analysis, you'll be able to identify the issues prior to them becoming issues, if you follow me. In other words, you get ahead of the situation. And I think that is, in essence, the answer. But very rarely do people find the time to just sit and think and consider what's going on. It's that old adage about the chap that walks into his boss's office and is staring out the window looking at the sky. And the guy thinks he's wasting time. He says to his boss, "What are you doing?" He said, I'm running my business. And I think that that's something that we don't have time for very often, just to stop and think and analyze. That's how you address the situation.
Paul, analogy Jacobs?
It's me today. Yeah, I'm full of them today.
I think it's interesting. A lot of business owners, as their businesses grow, are removed from the sales floor in terms of the day-to-day stuff that salespeople have to do. And in some respects, that is, of course, a good thing because it means the business is scaling and you're focusing on strategy. But one of the things to remove a bottleneck, in my experience, is taking the time to listen to the consultants to find out what the bottlenecks are that they're experiencing. Because sometimes you kind of forget what it's like, the day-to-day, and I'm not going to say grudge work, but some of it is a bit like that. They've got to do this, they've got to do that, they've got to load this, they've got to do that. And there may be a workaround, but you don't know because you're not doing it yourself. So therefore, ask your consultants, how can I make this more smooth for you? You are inevitably going to get, well, if we had a better system, if we spent more money on marketing, if our website was better, if our brand, you're going to get all of that. Of course you are, but you're also going to get some ideas from the floor that if you implement and take the time to listen and understand, can make your business run with less friction.
I think before, Heather, are you jumping on this one, or are you still?
Well, only just to say that I completely agree with what Paul and Dave have said. So apologies for my delayed joining. I have now caught up with the conversation. I'm dealing with a client at the moment where one of the problems is that they're not doing exactly what Paul and Dave are talking about. So rushing in, assuming they know what the problem is, creating a fix without actually taking the time to really listen and understand what the bottleneck actually is. And then creating the right solution. So I think, you're absolutely right, guys. It's about taking the time to make good decisions about what the problem really is and therefore what the solution is, and listening to people.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, that we're talking the same thing. I've got the same comment, but I want to add one thing to that, is that, if you're listening to the chatter on the floor, and you have a big protagonist against a certain thing that's causing the bottleneck, I'd invite them in and I'd say, right, I want you to help me cure them, and I'd give them the accountability of curing the problem. Because if they're going to come with a problem, I want them to come with a cure as well. And so getting people involved, so creating a team to help solve the problem is really important, but get one of the people who's massively commenting on that to be heading that team and running that team. Give them the accountability to actually address that problem. And then if people start to see problems being addressed, they're more likely to come up with other things that might be a bottleneck, which will again make the business run quicker, faster and smoother. But getting the people involved in the curing of those bottlenecks is really important, and giving them the accountability of that. And that will help the business, because if they know how to cure it, then fine. But if they're just moaning for moaning's sake, then what they're going to find is that they'll stop moaning and they'll start doing the right things and then working the system. So to me, it's about the accountability. So here's the question, then, why do you think leaders then continue to suffer bottlenecks in their business rather than taking positive action?
Okay, so I think this is, I'm going to use a word that maybe is a tough word to use, but I think the word's fear. I think that, and it's understandable, people are often concerned that if they try and tackle a situation that there'll be a sort of chain effect. There'll be a sort of situation where it will result in people potentially leaving, I think, in a nutshell. And I think that they'll procrastinate, they'll try and find ways around it. It's back to my conversation around tactically and strategically dealing with confrontation as early as possible, or getting in front of it. Because they've procrastinated, things have got worse, and now they're concerned about having to intervene and the potential implications, especially at a point at which, as we were discussing earlier, finding good quality people is difficult. And so there's a fear factor around dealing with what they consider to be sensitive situations, which may result, hopefully it doesn't, but may result in an individual throwing in the towel and leaving. And I think that's the major cause for leaders, procrastinating, not dealing with situations as quickly and as urgently as they should, and then find themselves in a position where an intervention may cause even further problems. So, there's an attitude of, well, I'll deal with it at some point in the future. Of course, the future never really happens. It never comes, and things just get rolled along and nothing ever gets dealt with.
It's a bit like the ball of wool with a cat, isn't it? Where you pull it and you don't want to keep pulling because you don't know what you're going to find at the other end. So it's sometimes, as a leader, it's best to avoid, or you think it's best to avoid just pulling at that ball of wool, just in case it unravels into a complete mess.
Yeah.
We have that, all of us running businesses, we have that all the time. So yeah, I get that point. I think it's important, though, that we know where the problems are, because without knowing where the problems are, the bottlenecks are, you can't grow your business, because it just amplifies the faster you grow. If you find, Dennis Linscott, my old boss at Intertech, used to say, if you're 5% off at the beginning, you're 50% off at the end of your first year.
Yeah, it's a good statement.
And he, it took a while to quite understand what he meant in the context of submitting a CV or closing a candidate or trying to help somebody, get over a counter offer. But it is very true. It's very true. If you're 5% off at the beginning, you're going to be way off at the end.
Heather?
Nothing to add to the erudite remarks of my
colleague. Heather, you disappointed me. I thought that was an HR thing that you could have definitely leapt in on. I
think I would be at the risk of repeating what the two of you have said.
let me jump in there. So don't get me wrong here. I don't think business owners are lazy, but I think they've become like parents that have selective deafness. So they hear the desk chatter constantly, the system's this, the system's that, etc., not realizing that the system actually is the bottleneck and the staff actually hate the process, and it's what we do. I've got a client at the moment, and it's really interesting, where when I first started working with them about 18 months ago, they wanted to change their CRM because they absolutely hated their CRM. They didn't use it, they didn't like it, etc., etc. Until they found out from the CRM provider that they couldn't leave for 18 months, and the cost of actually leaving the CRM was quite huge. So they did some investigation into looking at putting a new CRM in, and found taking the data from one to another was going to be hugely expensive. So we had a conversation, and I said, why not take half the cost of that extraction of data and give that back to your CRM provider and ask them to do more training, more development, talk to them about their bottlenecks and see what's happening. And so they've now got an implementation phase going in of re-educating the recruiters. And guess what? The recruiters now love the system because they now understand how to use it properly. They've got working parties going every Wednesday talking about what is the problem with the system, how do we cure that system. Then once a month they go to their provider, and their provider tries to help them with a solution. So all the time they're dumping ideas on how to improve their system and how to develop their system. It all came because the cost of changing was going to be so huge, and they were tied in for 18 months. And I said, well, it's just a dead waste of money. If you just spend this money over the 18 months and just have it as a storage system, what a waste of time. So we started to chat, and I'm going to drop into the chat box. I came across an article that gave 21 metrics to measure your business by. And they start to look at these metrics to see whether they could get these metrics out of their CRM to improve their business. And what it started to do was cure their processes within their business. And it was interesting. It was only about sort of 6 months ago I gave them these metrics, but it was really interesting saying the results that are now coming from them and the results there. So these aren't KPIs, these are genuine metrics to help iron out your bottlenecks within your business, and then how to measure your business. So I'll drop that into the chat box so people can use it from the chat box. We've talked a lot about process is one area that's littered with bottlenecks, and our IT implementation that we've talked about is usually pretty poor. So how do we get our process and our IT to run in system to help prevent bottlenecks occurring and to iron out and smooth the recruitment process, which will improve our employee engagement, candidate and client engagement?
Blimey, that's like War and Peace, that question. I'm trying to figure out where...
That's like an A-level question.
Yeah, hey, I'm not going to ask you to repeat it because we don't have another hour on this webinar. Yeah. I think, look, I think we alluded to this point earlier. Number one, you must make sure that our processes are consistently analysed. You know, processes that were invented a year, 2 years, 10 years ago are always dating. You know, the market's changing consistently. There is a responsibility upon that sits on the shoulders of business owners to consistently review processes, because what worked perfectly well 12 months ago is definitely not going to work as well now, and something that was implemented 5-10 years ago is probably completely broken. So I think you've got to look at your processes consistently, and given that most businesses now have a level of IT infrastructure, and there are lots more recruitment businesses investing more and more in AI and in software, then I think that is, as I said, contingent upon our people to look at what's working, what isn't working, and make adjustments. But to the point that was made earlier by you, Howard, I think it's about talking to our people, you know, from their perspective. What are their bottlenecks? How do we help them to become more effective? You know, I've yet to meet a recruitment consultant in over 45 years that enjoys what they would term admin, what they want to do with the good things in recruitment, you know, talk to candidates, go and see clients, make the deals and so forth. And anything that's related to CRM, for example, is in their mind useless admin. They don't always understand the benefits, as I said earlier, of making sure that the CRMs are updated and coded correctly. I do think it's very important to speak to our people, understand their obstacles, their challenges, and then working with them and working with our processes, looking at our processes, and then going back to the start point, the people that manufacture the software, the people that have sold us the software, talking to all three parties and figuring out what works best. But above all else, it's being very close to clients and understanding what works for them. So I think it's about communication is the bottom line here, making sure you're consistently talking to all interested and relevant parties. But don't think that your processes that work today are going to work sufficiently well in 6 months, 12 months. They won't be as effective as they are today.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have to be really careful we don't make assumptions in this area. You know, we all hear it. You know, the CRM's crap, or the system's crap, or the back office are crap, or whatever it is. And I think it's that not making an assumption, and that understanding that these things are very, very closely interlinked, and they evolve. They evolve over time, and there is a constant and ongoing need to be on top of it and challenging your assumptions. And, you know, assuming a new CRM is going to solve the problem without effective implementation, you know, you're just throwing money away, because it might not be that the technology is the problem. It might be the process. On the other hand, it might be the technology. So, you know, it's taking some advice and thinking deeply about what is your problem and what is the solution, and understanding that these things are all very closely interlinked. And a new piece of technology without good change management, project management, implementation, it's not going to make any difference.
Yeah, I agree, Heather. I think it's not about looking at the next new shiny thing.
Yeah.
Let's look at what we've got. Let's get the best out of what we've got, because in most cases, and certainly in, I think we were saying earlier, our experience of dealing with clients is that in general terms, they've got perfectly adequate software. There is genuinely not a lot wrong with it. Yes, you could get the next version, but what's the point in spending even more money if you're not getting the best out of what you've already got? So start with that first, see what you've got, get the best out of it. If you then think you have to upgrade, fine, go ahead. But don't just upgrade for the sake of it. So you've got the latest thing that, again, no one's going to use properly.
I think
for me, just quickly on this, it's about accountability from the owners as well. So many recruitment companies have more than one owner. So if there's 2 or 3 of you, make sure that technology and technology change or adaptability or whatever you want to call it is owned by one of you, not all of you. Because then one person can be left to get on or to manage the program, to manage the transition, to manage whether there needs to be any transition in the first place, rather than both of you or 3 of you all sitting around discussing stuff. It's really easy when you're running a business and you grow from 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 to be involved in everything. And actually the business that scale fastest are the ones where the owners have accountability for who's doing what and when. And tech stack and integration, that's one of those things that only one person needs accountability for.
So I think very, very quickly to try sort of bring this, because the next question is a really interesting question I want to ask before we close up today, is, if you look at those business analysts that run working businesses, they analyze what changes, but what goes down the line. So we make this change here, what effect does it have further down the line? And I think that's what you've got to look at, is if you're going to change anything, what effect does it have down the line? Does it improve the process? Does it cure the problem, or does it become a bigger blocker, etc.? So as you've all said, and I said on the last question, sometimes the technology you've already got is great, but you don't know how to use it properly. Sometimes it's not fit for purpose and therefore it needs to be changed. But if we don't review it often enough, and that's the thing, if we don't review it often enough, you don't know, and therefore you've got to look at that. And I think to create a better system that is linked, you have to keep reviewing what your system is trying to do and improve your processes. So the last question, I think this is a really interesting question. This is the question that I think Heather's going to have the most fun with, is sometimes managers, employees and leaders are the worst bottlenecks. How do you tackle such a person?
Of course, this one's right in my bailiwick, isn't it? For me, if you want an encapsulated, very quick answer, because we've literally got 2 minutes left, it's with confidence and with advice. So don't be afraid to deal with your problem people. Take some advice so that you've got the confidence to just deal with it. The worst thing you can do if a person is your bottleneck is ignore it and think it's going to go away. It's not. It's only going to get worse. So have the confidence to deal with it, because not dealing with it feels like it's going to be the easier option. Never is. Never is.
How can you argue with the HR guru? It's impossible, isn't it? I mean, you can't. You have to agree with everything Heather's just said. The thing here, and we always say it. The thing here, and we always say it, is keep very, very close to your people. And that is the same analogy we used earlier with regard to clients and candidates. But of the 3 parties, it's your people that you need to be tightest to. And that's not about the occasional sit down one-to-one just because it's in the diary every 3 months. This is regularly. This is every week, making sure you're super tight to people, understanding what their sentiments are, their emotions, what's going on in their lives, and keeping them, as you said, Howard, if you've got somebody that is the protagonist, then getting them even tighter to you. I'm not suggesting they're enemies, but the old adage about keep your friends closer and your enemies closer is very true. keep close to people, and that way you have a chance to manage a situation and get the best outcome, rather than it becoming a major issue, a major conflagration. I think that's a word, isn't it?
That's a great word.
Not bad for this time in the morning after one coffee. And I think that's the thing. Get close, get in front of it. That's the issue.
Yeah, I think I'm just in summary is establish whether the bottleneck is an actual bottleneck or a reason for poor performance. Because so often people will say, oh, I can't do it because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this. Well, that's the conversation. And then you can get underneath the skin and find out whether it's real or whether this is actually an indication that somewhere else there's an issue. And that goes to Paul's point about getting close to your people, and to Heather's point about understanding what their motivation is and what's going on there.
I think from my view, it's that perception thing, isn't it? It's not your perception as an owner or a manager or as an employee of the process that counts. It's not your perception of your own management skills, etc. It's the perception of others. So if others are saying it's wrong, then yeah, we've got to look at that. And I think this whole webinar has been about addressing the main processes, but you need to address your management mindset that will then optimize your employees' potential by removing the bottlenecks. And if that's a person, then that person needs to be removed. So training initially is really important for the management team to train them to be able to deliver what you need to be delivering. And I think sometimes from a manager is getting out of the way and letting people perform. Simply get out of their way. So, great managers have this sort of skill of clearing their path that allows the employee to travel along it quickly, efficiently, and smoothly. And I think that's the thing that we've got to think about, that if there's a bottleneck there, then it's stopping our employees traveling. And so we got to take the perception, if people are saying that, whether it's an employee, a client, or a candidate, the perception is remove the blockage. And if that's a person, remove it, and that's the way I'd look at it. And I think we've got to think about those barriers. Are we preventing from people engaging in your business or not? And that to me is where we start to think about those bottlenecks. So we've got bottlenecks as people, as processes, as systems, etc. Okay, we should spend more time reviewing those as a management structure to enable things to move forward. So, ladies and gents, and Heather, thank you very much for your attending. A little bit late, but never. But there you go. Next week, we've got a really interesting one. How leaders inspire performance. And I think listening to what we've talked about today, how leaders inspire performance is really important, especially start moving further into this later this year and into next year. How your leaders inspire your team will be really, really important to the growth of your business over the next 12 to 18 months. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. It's been much appreciated as always. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the question box. Or if you've got anything that you want to put to us directly, just email us directly and we're happy to field any questions. Guys and ladies, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.